Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Warrant Officer Jason Russ. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of the following schools. From Queensland, South Bank Central State School, Southbrook Central State School, Southbrook, and St Paul's School Primary Department, Bald Hills, and from Victoria, Doncaster Primary School, Doncaster. If able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Saddler Sergeant James Patrick Shannon, who died of wounds during the Boer War. James Shannon, known as Jimmy, was probably born in Queensland around 1880. At the turn of the century, he was living in Charters Towers, where he had been for a number of years with his mother, his brothers, and at least one stepbrother. He was the first to enlist for active service when the 5th contingent of the Queensland Imperial Bushmen was raised in early 1901 and left Australia within weeks with the service number 1. The arrival of the contingent sparked interest in Cape Town, with newspapers noting they were a very fine lot of men. The Queensland Imperial Bushmen is one of the finest bodies of men ever landed here. Shannon's contingent arrived in South Africa after the major set-piece battles and sieges were over, and an extended period of guerrilla-type skirmishes with the Boers had begun. By late 1901, the Queenslanders were very busy on patrol and regularly met with the enemy. One of Jimmy Shannon's fellow members of the Queenslanders, Trooper William Lilly, described one of the skirmishes they had in December 1901. He wrote, "We had a good cut at the Boers, and for about an hour the bullets came down in thick as shower of rain. There were 11 of our men wounded and 1 killed. We had another go in yesterday. I can assure you the Boers went very smartly. We knocked a few of them over, however, we gave the Boers a hot time." Less than 2 weeks later, the Queenslanders again engaged the enemy near the town of Onverwijk. Boer forces made small attacks at various points, drawing the larger force into the area where they were outnumbered. Another friend of Shannon's, Trooper Charles Bryce, wrote, "We simply marched into a huge trap amongst the hills, and we were surrounded in a few minutes. We tried to make a stand, but found it was of no use." Outnumbered, the Australians were forced to withdraw, the Queenslanders suffering 12 casualties in the process. 11 of those were killed in action, and Sergeant Shannon was badly wounded. Bryce described what happened to Shannon. "I owe my life and escape to the sergeant of ours, named Ginny Shannon, number 1 of the contingent, who galloped into the firing line. Bryce had fallen from his horse, and Shannon pulled him up onto his own horse to get him out. Sergeant Shannon then caught Bryce's horse and gave it to 2 other men pinned down by Boer fire, ensuring their escape. Bryce found another horse and got out. Shannon returned to help more men. Trooper William Walsh watched Shannon rush back to rescue more wounded men. He later wrote, "He picked up 1 wounded man and carried him about 200 yards away and put him safely under cover. While doing this, there was terrific fire going on from the enemy. When he put the man safely away, he rushed back for another. But, poor chap, he just bent down to pick up a man when he was hit." Bryce arrived back to find Shannon laid out on the ground, not dead, but shot through the neck and spine. Sergeant Jimmy Shannon was taken to hospital, an arduous journey over rough roads in an ambulance wagon. Although he was made comfortable in hospital, nothing could be done for him, and he died of his wounds shortly afterwards. In his last letter home, Shannon wrote hopefully of leaving Africa to attend the coronation ceremonies in England, after which he would come home. His mother later put a poem in the local newspaper to mourn his death. It reads in part, "Only the death of a boy at the front, only a weeping mother at home, bewailing the war where she lost her son, breaking her here because he would roam. And no one cares for the daily die, out there on the veldt in the cruel war. What if mothers weep and brothers mourn? They cannot be heard mid the cannon's roar." Trooper Walsh later wrote, "There is one thing to be proud of, no matter how things go. He proved himself to be as brave as any man ever fought." Jimmy Shannon died at the age of 21. His name is listed on the roll of honour to my right among 605 Australians who lost their lives in the Boer War. A photograph of his name on the Boer War Memorial in Queensland is displayed today down by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Saddler, Sergeant James Patrick Shannon, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and for the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Posier or in the low scope at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.